Hello YouTube, RJ Carter here, and for this one, talk about the life, the understandings of it all. 'Cause the more you start to live it, the more you realize that the principle essentially becomes a chance for the poor, a party for the rich. But not to dwell on that too much. Kind of want to talk about the concept and topic of women as it relates to men in this American society, and even in religion and existence in of itself, because there's a lot of different sectors and a lot of different categories to deal with the women as far as men. And from what I've experienced or from what I've studied, there's basically two major ones, which is the Christian doctrine of getting married and having multiple kids and having one wife, and then there's the Buddhist the true Buddhist form of not even having a woman, not even having a girlfriend, not even having relations, period, and kind of being that aesthetic monk in the woods kind of thing. And what that relates to is kind of an agnostic view of life. The Buddhist perspective is actually, and it basically relates down to being either pro life, procreation, being quote fruitful and having multiple kids, to whereas having no kids at all. And it plays a balancing act, because I don't believe that the Bible says to marry. I understand, a lot of people would conduct that it states to don't have sex before marriage. Yes, but the simple aspect of being married, I don't think it will. I don't think it prophesizes to be married. But then again, you could argue Genesis, be fruitful and multiply, man and woman kind of thing. But I'm not too sure. And there's a lot of different factors to it too, because from the MGTOW perspective, from the men going their own way perspective, they would state that men and women are not meant to be together. They're not meant to be friends. They're basically just meant to be procreation partners and kind of raise a child, and that's it, to a certain age, and that's it. Ideally speaking, they're not meant to be friends. They're not meant to share hobbies and interests. They're not meant to be, they're basically two different types of humans. Like they're human, but they're two different types. The cheetah doesn't hang out with the lion on a normal. You know what I mean? Like, they're two different. Sure, they're the same type of cat, and we could go an infinite amount of examples, from insects to fish, etc. But you could even argue, on a certain level, if men and women were animals, like fish, women would be fish and men would be mammals, kind of things, where they're, just to state the differences. But from the MGTOW perspective, they would, analyze that, men essentially don't have a good time with the women, as far as, if you're not quote unquote dating a woman, you wouldn't really care to conversate. The jokes aren't as fluid, and from a pure hanging out perspective, and a lot of people will tell you this, if you were ever hanging out with a girl, there's a point in the conversation where it's just boring, and you realize that this person is, if they were a male, if you actually thought about it, if this person you're hanging out with was a man instead of a woman, you'd be like, well, this person's kind of boring, kind of uninteresting. We actually don't have that much in common. Our hobbies are different, our interests are different. There's not too much this person can teach me on a certain scale, on a certain level. You go from there, and that's kind of the Buddhist perspective of, kind of Buddha understanding that, men and women are not meant to be together. As a matter of fact, they shouldn't be together, and continue on this life of perpetual, suffering and birth and death and tossing and toil and working kind of concept. But from the Christian perspective, you have a man that's dominant, and he is married to a woman, and the man is dominant. You don't see this in these day and times, but the man is dominant. The woman is kind of submersive to the man in the house, and the man decides what to do, what not to do, kind of thing. The woman doesn't have too much say, and if she does have say, then the man, ideally speaking, has enough strength and power to overcome the woman, to the point of beating, all these things. So it creates an interesting perspective, and there's a lot of scholars, a lot of poets that write about this, the topic of women as it relates to men. When you take away the sexuality of it, when you actually look at life from the procreation perspective, men and women, they're not ideally meant to be together. They're meant to, be together in a sense of creating life. But if you're not creating life, there's really no point and aspect to it. But adding my experience, definitely for sure. You don't want to hang out with guys your whole life. As a heterosexual male in American society, westernized society, there are fun times to be had when you're hanging out with a female group. But I would argue that those times change. Like in the beginning, a lot of times, when you have the hormones going, you kind of fantasize and facilitate a false reality upon them that doesn't meet. Whereas if you were, if you were in your elementary days, you could care, like, it was the, battle of the girls stayed over there. Matter of fact, probably been better if they didn't exist. They're kind of just a waste of space, and boys stayed over here kind of thing. But as time goes on, as you grow older, but I don't know. It is what it is, because as you grow old, like, because most girls, when you think about it, especially growing up, you wouldn't care, to have. In fact, if they were to ignore you and not exist at all, it would have been a great benefit. But then again, as you grow older, as the hormones start kicking in, you're like, oh, they become the number one thing when they shouldn't. It's good to have that childistic mind, and older adults have this mindset of women are just women. They're not really worth the time, space, energy, or conditioning it takes to hold one or what have you. And a lot of men, you kind of see this. They're kind of, if they're married, they're kind of submersive to the woman, and the woman kind of triangulates the relationship and what have you. But it's two different styles, and two different styles of living as far as a man goes. Are you want to be married and have kids, or you want to be an aesthetic and kind of become on the spiritual path of the Buddhist perspective, the Hindu perspective, the Indian perspective, the Easternized perspective of religion, and conforming to your energies. But Inside Edge Guru said it's best, at a certain point, and I forgot what the video was, what the topic of the video was about, but on a certain point, he would state that, the men with 12 kids fantasizes and wonders what it would have been like to be an aesthetic, and the aesthetic at a certain point in time, fantasizes and realizes and thinks about what it'd be to be a man of 12 kids. But, those are the two opposite spectrums. Those are two opposite spectrums. In either case, the mind is what the decisions have made, the free will, you could say, what the decisions are made. But in my truth, as far as the life is easier when you don't deal with women. It's less chaotic, it's less hectic, it's less of a jargon, it's less of a fantasy, it's less of a mystery. Especially from a digitalized sense, from a realistic sense, if you just keep your conversations to the point of work related or business related, or essentially nothing relationship related, you do kind of live a carefree life. You live a simple life of simple problems. Whereas if you add a woman, it creates more jargons. But with that being said, there are pleasures to be gained. If one was traveling to a new location, a new country, ideally speaking, you don't want to hang out with guys, the whole time, because you have guys in your homeland, you have guys where you live that are friends that you've known for years that you can hang out with. But a woman, a new person in your life, and that's the thing too. Like, I believe that at a certain point in time when a man reaches a certain age, he's had friends, childhood friends, so there's really no point in meeting new friends to a certain extent. So, there are quote-unquote pleasures that could be had with dating a woman, with meeting someone new, going to a new city, a new country, new location, new place, and getting to know a person. But at the end of the day, you got to tread, risky waters. You got to tread, because on a certain point, you got to be, because you could be wishy-washy on certain topics, but on many topics, you'd be wishy-washy, but on certain specific ones, you got to be solid, and a solid rock and no moving or what have you. But just kind of relating back to the concept of the nature of their existence and the nature of reality. And to kind of blend in the two, you could say that you could blend in the Buddhist path as well as the biblical Christian path of not essentially looking at or speaking to women. Because if you don't, then you don't have sex before marriage, you don't even get married, and then you gotta debate and analyze the Genesis, the famous Genesis, be fruitful and multiply. which basically means, have a multitude of children. Be procreative, kind of concept. But yeah, I mean, it's a reality. It's a jargon in many perspectives and many realities. Um, and at the end of it all, ideally speaking, to kind of bring it back to the modern day, going to work, saving, paying your bills kind of concept. If you're a man and you don't have kids, for example, and you live your life, you do grow to an age where you're not, caring for kids, you're not picking up kids at the school, you're not doing any of these things. As you grow older, you don't have no one to essentially take care of you. You don't have any grandchildren, you don't have a huge family to go to, during Thanksgiving or Christmas. You don't have, just that realm of, going on family vacations and what have you. But from that time, you kind of live a modernized perspective of a sage, as in, person that's into their studies, because everybody has the same 24 hours. So if you're not spending those hours with the kids and growing and helping them grow and develop and what have you, that free time needs to be filled. That free time needs to be occupied by something. And more often than not, it's studies, it's hobbies, it's interests, it's building a business, it's growing your brand, yourself, your knowledge, or and a perspective on life, which I would argue is better than having kids. In the long run, it's better than having kids and having that spiritual foundation and perspective. So in either case, people have the same 24 hours, but ideally speaking, as far as dealing with women in this modernized society goes, it's better to not look at them. It's better to keep it professional, keep it business oriented, and go on with life. Until next time, Arjun Carter here. Peace.